Welcome to today's DDM Focus Workshop. The topic for today's workshop is the new Solidworks interface. Now, this is a preview of the new interface. We are about to publicly release it, but it was not released at the time of making the video and the workshop. I've created a project to cover the workshop topics, so we can see the active project that I have on the screen here. And what I've done is created a set of DDM actions, which are all of the topics that we're going to cover. The first topic is file caching. Now, just before I do that, I'm going to minimize DDM because this new version does not require me to call DDM from the Solidworks interface. So they are no longer locked together. They can remain completely independent. Right, file caching. Every client PC has an amount of local file cache available, and we've improved the intelligence and the speed of that cache. If I clear my local cache so there are no files on my local computer, so that the first time I load something from the server, it will bring it across the network. Now, I have a sample assembly here to work on. This is a Solidworks assembly supplied by Sounds Fishy. Sounds Fishy are a pro audio video furniture and console company. So they provide these consoles and furniture to the professional audio video industry. I'm going to double click on my assembly to load it. I'm going to choose not to close the window after loading. Now, this has got 231 files to load, and we're going to load it for the first time to see how long it takes. So this is just to see the performance of the file caching, and then I'll explain these windows in the later actions. So this is loading it into Solidworks, and what we will be able to see when it's finished is okay, the load has finished. 231 files took 32.2 seconds. Opening into Solidworks was 23 of those 32 seconds. So the loading from DDM was approximately 10 seconds of that time. If I close the window now, because the files have been cached locally, if I clear the screen, and I'm going to clear my working folder, if I go back in and reload the same assembly, we get the load window. I choose to load, and the only time that's taken now is the time for Solidworks to open the assembly, and we'll see that in the result. Okay, so this load only took 21.7 seconds. The Solidworks time was 21 seconds, but the DDM time was less than half a second to bring the files. So, improved local file caching. Let's close. So we've covered that topic. Let me go back up to my workshop, go to my actions, and let's say we've completed that topic. The next one is file batching and compression. Now, I'm going to hop back to Solidworks. I'm going to close my assembly again, and I'm going to clear my working folder. Now, if I reopen my assembly, what you will notice, and it's very quick, so in order to slow it down, I'm going to clear the cache again. When I load, instead of loading 231 files one at a time, bringing them across the network, what we do is we batch the files and then we compress the batches. So it's going to reduce the number of times that it touches the latency, the speed on your network, and it's reducing the amount of data we are bringing across the network. This is particularly useful if you're working from home or in a different location across a VPN where the network will be a lot slower. So just to demonstrate that, there's 231 files, but when I load, you'll see the blue bar at the top. We're bringing the files in 3 batches of files, and we're compressing the files. So the loading is considerably quicker than the previous version. Okay, it's just opening into Solidworks. And here we can see in the progress bar, batch downloading 94 files, 126 files, and 11 files. So much improved load performance. So a combination of the improved caching and the way that we're loading the files makes it all considerably quicker. Okay, I'm going to close that, go back to the project. Improved file batching and compression. Complete. The next one is the load progress summary. Well, we've seen that already, but let's look at that once again. If I close, clear my working folder, and I will load again from DDM, my assembly, we have a progress summary. Now there's an option here to say close this window after load. So if you don't want to see the summary at the end, you can turn this option on that will just close it immediately. But for now, we're going to run this load again, and the load progress summary, this is the progress so we understand what's happening during the load process. And then after the file has finally loaded, this is the summary afterwards, where we can see how long it took to open it in CAD, how long it took to get information from the file server, and to update any properties that needed updating. And as I say, this window can be closed automatically if you don't want to see the summary at the end. Let's hop back into DDM. So load, progress, and summary is all new to the product. This didn't exist previously. The next one, load warnings. So the load window is more intelligent now. The old one did give us some information, but this one is more intelligent. Okay, so we're going to go back to here, and this time I'm going to load a smaller assembly just to make it a little bit quicker. So let's pick a sub-assembly of the assembly. Okay, here's a frame. What will I pick? I'll pick this. Okay, so when I now load this, the load window is telling me that the file is already local. So you see in the third column here, these files, I already have them in my local working folder. And you'll see in the first column, therefore it will not reload the files again. It doesn't need to, because I already have them local, but it has checked as to whether they're the latest version of those files. So the ability to know that we've already got files that are local. Okay, let's cancel that and go back to our workshop. So the ability to identify if you've got local files. Now this is actually says later local files. So let's demonstrate what that means. So I'm going to load the assembly again. So I am going to load it again. It doesn't need to bring them from the server. It's just opening them from my local working folder, but making sure I have the latest files. Okay, so this is just the Solidworks time to open the assembly. Okay, so I have my assembly here. Now, if I go and modify a part in my assembly, what would I want to modify? Let me just open this in its own window. Okay, if I make a change, so all I'm going to do here is put a hole in the part. Or if I just do a local save, I know that I've modified that locally. Apologies, did the wrong thing. Close. I want to do a Solidworks save as if something locally has been modified. Okay, but if I close my assembly without saving it back to DDM, if I go back into reopen my assembly, the load window will warn me that I have a local file that is later than the one that I'm looking to load now. So it's going to warn me of that. Now, if that is off the screen and I load, it's now telling me you've got files that you're loading, but you have a later copy of the file in your local working folder. So there's the risk that you could overwrite your data. So if I say no, but the default, we have made it to not reopen and overwrite the file. So protecting what you've modified locally so that we don't overwrite the information. But if you want to, you can override that to overwrite your local copy. Right, I'm going to cancel that. Go back to our workshop and our actions. So the ability to identify if we have a file locally that has been modified and is later than the file from DDM. Complete. Identifying old issues. If I have an assembly, the way I will demonstrate this one is I'm going to load one of my standard demonstration assemblies, and in here I've got some standard bearing housing assemblies. This assembly here, if I load this assembly, it's identified that the assembly I'm loading contains a part that is not the latest issue. If I don't see that information on a load, it will stop me and say you're loading an assembly that has something that is not the latest issue. I have the option of going back in here and selecting the latest issue. So here we can see that issue 78 is the latest issue. When I choose the latest issue, the warning goes away, and therefore I can now load that into session with the latest issue of that part. Okay, cancel that. Go back to my workshop. Actions. Old issues. Complete. We also have the ability to identify files if they are not recommended. The easiest way to demonstrate this is, again, if I go to my assembly, if I have a part in my assembly that is no longer a recommended part, we see we've got this attribute. I've changed my label to call it preferred. On your system it will be called recommended. Well, if I use the bulk editor because it's a released item, if I say that the preferred status is no, we no longer want to be using this part in new designs, then when I load my assembly, it is highlighting that in the recommended column, this is not a recommended part. We can also see again that we've got not the latest issue, and if I try and load, it will start to give me those warnings. So just like the current version of the interface, it will highlight if you are loading files or assemblies that contain parts that are not recommended. Let's go back. Now, a new one to the load window is the ability to identify if you have parts that need a parameter refresh. Now, the way to explain this is this assembly. If I modify the description of this part, even though it's released, the bulk editor, because I'm in a power user group, I can modify things released, but it does audit track it, and you can control who is allowed to use the bulk edit tool. So I modified the preferred status, and when you modify something that is a mapped parameter between CAD and DDM, you'll see here that we have a number of parts in my assembly where the refresh parameter flag is set to yes. Okay, and therefore if I load my assembly, it is highlighting that we've got parameter refresh options in here. What that will mean is at the point when you load your assembly into Solidworks, they have now been changed because you've updated the parameters against your models, and therefore they will need to be saved back to the database. Now that's a bit of a catch-22 situation, because if it's a released part and you're happy that it doesn't need saving back, one of the additional options that we're building into this new public release is the ability to select items. So if I select these parameter refresh, using the bulk editor, I can now clear the refresh parameter setting and say no. You have to put your password in. And when I say OK, it will give you this warning that is explaining the implications of what you're doing. Now, based on the changes that I'm making, I'm happy that this is correct for my environment or for my company. So I've cleared those refresh parameter flags so it will not warn me on load. So lots of things to allow you to adjust your data, update your data, and clear those necessary parameter refresh flags that then cause a catch-22 situation when you're working with released parts. Okay, let's go back to our workshop. Actions, parameter refresh. So let's get on to saving data. So I'm going to, do I still have it loaded in Solidworks? No, I don't. So let's go back to here and I will reload my assembly. So let's go into my project and pick up my assembly. I'm going to double click to open my assembly, but this time I will say automatically close when the load has finished. So once you're familiar with this and you understand how it works, I don't need to see the summary at that. It's just telling me I've got something locally modified. Yes, I still want to load. So we're going to load our assembly. It's opening it into Solidworks. And when the load has finished, I've chosen not to have a summary afterwards, so it will just disappear. Now, this is quite a large assembly. So, right, we have our assembly. Let's look at the next topic, which is single save window. The current version of DDM, when you're working in Solidworks, is you have a save icon and then it will just start going through your save one level at a time, and there's a summary at the end of it. This is a big change in this version, because now when I choose the save command, and there's other ones that we won't cover today, save copy as, save all configurations, there's some additional options. The main save option, when I choose save, it will analyze what I have got loaded locally on my computer. So this is analyzing the entire assembly that I've got loaded, and it will give me a single save window. So this is my single save window. And as you can see, I see the full structure of the assembly that I have loaded into Solidworks. Now, if I had been modifying parts while I was working in Solidworks, they would be highlighted like this, so I can see the items that need to be changed. So before we do the save, we get this display window that allows us to make all of our save decisions. Okay, if some of these parts were released parts, then you wouldn't be allowed to save them, and you would have to choose one of the other options. For example, if I say, well, these two files here, well, at the moment these are work in progress. So just for the purposes of demonstration, I'm going to change the status of these two files, and I'm going to set these to released to simulate not being allowed to overwrite those files. Okay, so these are both released files, and therefore I would need to create a new issue of these two files. I'm going to reserve the new issue to my workbench, and you can apply the issue, the change number, etc. So all of this works exactly the same way the current version works. Let me just put my windows nicely laid out. Okay, so I'm creating a new issue of these two parts, and I'm overwriting these parts, and what I might say is, well, this part, I might be saving this as a brand new part. Again, I could choose at the top window here, brand new, and therefore what I could do is go in and choose, well, what numbering do I want? That's the part number that I want. We can also show drawings, and we'll come to that later. Okay, so I want to save this as a brand new part. I have the ability to change the description. I'm going to just put something daft in. I'm going to put my name. So I'm making all of my save decisions in a single save window before I decide to run the save, and I can then say save. Okay, we've not reserved something. I need to reserve the new part into a folder. It's now going through my save, and this is the save progress window so that I can see everything that is happening during the save. So as we can see here, saving, generating files, updating mass properties, and it's stepping through all of the things that it needs to do. It's updating bills and materials. Now this save progress helps the user understand what's happening and to know that the save is in progress. So all of that work has been done, including creating the new issues, saving the new part, updating the assemblies and all of the bombs. Now this 3 minutes 19 seconds includes all of the time for me explaining. Let me close this, hop back to here, progress and summary. So this is what we're looking at, both of these things at the same time, the single save window, the progress and the summary. So we're going to run a save again. Let's say that save has been completed. Let's talk about the progress and the summary. So the next section we're looking at is the save, progress and summary. If we go back to Solidworks, we're now looking at the this frame section of the assembly. If I choose my save again, so if I choose save, it's going to open me the single save window. Now I'm going to choose to save some of these parts, assemblies and drawings. Say right click, overwrite the files. If I say OK, this is the save progress. So we can see what's happening. It's updating CAD parameters, checking the properties. It's now generating neutral files. So it's generating PDFs of the drawings. We can see it flashing in the background. The key here is it's doing all of this for me. It's now updating bills and materials, and it's saved. So the entire save took 38.4 seconds. And in the summary in the bottom window here, we can see that the CAD generation of neutral files was 37% of the time. Okay, so let's close that. Let's hop back into the database and progress and summary. Complete. New to this version, in the single save window, we have the ability to save mass properties or neutral files. So we can turn these on and off now. If we go back into SolidWorks, what we mean by this is in the save window, so I do my single save. Now I might be working on this for any length of time. We have the ability here to turn off neutral files or mass properties. Now some businesses don't use mass properties all the time, so we can turn it off because there's an overhead to that in the save. I also want to turn off the neutral files because I might be working on this for a period of time, and rather than having to generate those neutral files every time, let's say I've just modified these files, so I'm doing a new save, but I'm not creating mass properties and neutral files. So this time when I save, it will be considerably quicker because it's got less to do. So that save only took 46 seconds, including my explanation. If I do that again and I say save, I'm just going to choose a few bits quickly here like that and say overwrite. OK. We'll see how quickly it performs the save. And I know it's working and I can see what it's done. 16.9 seconds to do the save. So really good save, progress and summary window after the save has completed. Sorry, the mask properties and the neutral files was that section. That's fine. Okay, so you can turn them on and off. Now in the single save window we have a number of options. Overwrite files, create new files, save new issues of files. Let's go back to my assembly. So in here, as I demonstrated earlier, you might select something. It would highlight if it's been modified, and therefore I have the option here to overwrite files. Clearly it will not let me overwrite files that are released, and therefore I would either create them as new or up-issued. You also have these icons at the top of the screen here, so you can choose things and say, well, I want to save these as new, and again, as I demonstrated earlier, we want to assign a number. I'm going to assign the parent for the drawing, and I'm going to leave them in the same category, and I want to reserve these to my workbench, and then I can perform my save. So all very visual and very fast with our save summary. Okay, let's hop back. So lots of save options in here. Complete. We've already talked about the ability to include drawings or not. So just to recap on that, if I do a save in our single save window, even if the drawings have not been loaded, there's an option here to say include drawings. Okay, so I've turned that off. If I turn it on, as you see here, it will display all of the drawings. Okay, now I'm not generating neutral files. Again, you can turn that on and off. The good thing about include drawings, I would leave this on by default, because if you're modifying a part or an assembly and you forget to save the drawing, then you're running the risk of the drawing not being up to date and correct. So it's a really good option. I would recommend leaving that on by default. Okay. Include drawing option. Complete. Permanently ignore. Now you do have the option in the save window that if you've got parts that you never want to save, you might have things within an assembly structure or part-to-part relationships that you do not want to be saving. Or you may have configurations that need to be ignored, etc. Well, I'm just going to pick on any part for now. I have the ability here to say, well, it's already permanently ignored, so I could say stop permanently ignoring it. So you can toggle those settings on and off as to whether you want things ignored or not. If you have things that are ignored, then we can say show ignored parts, and we can turn them on and off in the display. Okay, so the ability to ignore files during the save process. Let me cancel that and go back to here. The next bit I want to demonstrate is the background file uploader. This is new to DDM, and we're going to explain this in conjunction with explaining remote working. So if you're working on a remote location, either home or what have you, on a VPN connection, the network is always a lot slower. We have this new file background uploader. Okay, now this sits in the background on your computer and it deals with the files, sending them back to the DDM server so that you don't have to wait for that to happen. So let's see whether we can demonstrate this. I'm going to go back into SolidWorks. I've got this assembly loaded, and for demonstration I'm going to tile these side by side. Okay, I'm going to open the background uploader, and let me just resize this so we can have it on this side of the screen. Okay, so you wouldn't normally work like this, but this is just to demonstrate what's happening in the background. If I now do a save, it analyzes what I've got locally. Again, I'm going to select a load of things that we need to save. In fact, let's expand all, select everything, overwrite every file. Okay, one of them I'm not allowed to, probably because it's released. Okay, so and we're going to generate neutral files. This is a big save. Very rare that you would ever want to save this amount of data. Okay, but this is just to demonstrate the performance. When I now save, it's showing me the progress window, but what you will see in the background when the progress gets to a certain stage is it will start uploading the files to the server. So it's going through my save process. So this 49 parts, we've updated the properties, we're creating neutral files. You see how much work it's doing in the past. So it's very unusual that you would save this amount of data in a single save. However, it just shows you the performance and how quickly we're processing everything. During our testing of this, the performance increase is anywhere beyond 10 times faster. So it's a considerable change to the product. Okay. Every single PDF, we're generating 49 PDF files. Well, of course, in the current version of the DDM SolidWorks interface, you would have to wait for all of those files to be sent back to the server when the save has been completed. However, what we now have, updating the bombs, and then so the whole save did it in 1 minute 55 seconds. And you'll see in the background, well, it's happened so quickly we didn't see it, but I can carry on working without having to wait for the save. Because I'm on a local network, it was very fast. I'm going to go to my DDM server machine, and I'm going to slow the network down between the client and the server. So because I'm using virtual machines, I now have the ability to slow the save down. Okay. And I'm going to add latency and bandwidth restrictions. Okay. So let me minimize my server, and I'm going to do the save again. So this save is as if I'm working from home on a VPN. Again, I'm going to expand all. I'm going to select everything, overwrite all the files that I'm allowed to. There's one of them that I'm not, and I'm going to say OK. So the processing of this information is at the same speed as if I was connected to the same network as the server. However, uploading the files, because I'm working remotely, would take considerably longer. So we're updating, saving every drawing, saving the PDFs of every drawing. So this is something you would not normally save this amount in a single save, but this is just to demonstrate the performance and demonstrate the performance working remotely using the new background file uploader. Updating the bills and materials, creating thumbnails. The whole save took 1 minute 25 seconds. I can continue to work on my design, and you can see in the background the files are being uploaded to the server. So even if I close this design, if I go back into the database and I go in and load a completely different assembly, Okay, so I might go in and load this assembly. I'm loading my assembly, I say OK. So I'm still working, and yet the previous save is still being carried out in the background. All of that is save time. So it's a real big efficiency gain on saving your data back from DDM, from your DDM client onto the DDM server. So let's go back to our project. A new background file uploader. And as I said, the net result of that is saving your data. Based on the tests on the assemblies that we did, is about 10 times faster than the current version. Particularly useful if you're working remotely from home or a remote location. And next we'll talk about configurations. So, to demonstrate this, I have some sample parts in here. Okay, so if I look in here, what I probably have is, it doesn't really matter what I use. I've got this housing here. And at the moment I have 3 configurations. Well, these are all obsolete at the moment, but that doesn't matter. I'm going to load the default configuration into DDM. Okay, so this is my part, and I want to add a configuration. At the moment I've got these 3 and I've got a default. Okay, I want to add a new configuration, and I'm going to call this workshop. So I have a new configuration. I hit save all configurations. I get my single save window. And my single save window will show me the configurations that I already have. Well, there was a default new in there that DDM did not know about, and there's 3 configurations that DDM does already know about, but as you could see, I'd made these obsolete in my database. So what I can do here is say permanently ignore those configurations. Okay, now I'm showing at the moment they can be turned on or off. These 2 new configurations I want to reserve to my project folder or workbench, and I'm going to give them automatic numbers. And I'm going to put them in a category which is my bearing housings. So my bearing housing, we'll put them in the specials. And let me just size that window so it's nice and neat. Okay, so I'm going to put them in that category, and I'm going to save them away. So adding new configurations. And there we go. So much more visual in terms of handling both assembly and part configurations, and considerably quicker as well. So I've added my new configuration to this particular family. Again, if I do save all configurations, it will only let me overwrite the ones that are modifiable. If they are released, I can tell it to permanently ignore them, as I've done with these obsolete ones. And I say OK, and it will go and do that for me. OK, cool. Close. The final thing to show you here is the clear working folder. The current version of the Solidworks interface, if you do a clear working folder, it will just ask you, are you sure? And it will clear the folder. The new one will show you the files that you have loaded on your local computer. Now, all of these are being shown green because that means DDM is up to date. We've got a 3rd column here, up to date in DDM. So I know it's quite safe for me to clear my working folder. Okay, so if I cancel the cancel the clear working folder, I'm going to create a new part. Okay, and I'm just going to do that and just create a disk. Okay, so I've created a new part, and I'm going to save it to my local working folder and just call it disk. Okay, what I'm also going to do here is I'm going to open another part from my working folder. Let's say this part here. Well, if I'd modified this part, let me zoom in and look what I've got going on here. Or let's say if I put a tiny little chamfer in here and make it 0.1. So I've added a very small chamfer to that file. Basically, I've modified it. And if I save that locally and then I close it out of SolidWorks, if I now choose to clear my local working folder, it's highlighting in an orange color that this item is not known to DDM. DDM does not know about it, and the item in the salmon pink color has been modified locally. So the clear working folder is now intelligent, and it will stop you from deleting data from your local working folder if you haven't saved it. Okay, now and from this window you can reopen items from that dialog as well. So I could come back in and say, well, I haven't saved that to DDM, let me save it. So I'm going to save the part. I get my single save window. I'm going to click in this field because I want to assign a part number. I want to assign it to a category. I'm just going to put it in one of my temporary categories for now. You can also click in and modify the description in this window. You can also switch on different columns if you want to have your normal required attributes displayed. When I say OK, I want to reserve to my workbench, and it will save away. So again, much more visual, but this is to do with clear the working folder. If I now close, the only warning I will get is that I've got something that's locally modified that I have not yet saved to DDM. Now, if you do go ahead and clear the working folder, it will warn you. If you still say yes and clear the working folder, we've got these backups of the working folder. So we will keep the files for a number of days or an amount of disk space. You can clear the backups or you can open the backups. So if I open Windows Explorer here, these are all the backups of the clear working folders that I have in the background. So if you do accidentally remove something from your working folder that you shouldn't, you have a period of time that you can go and retrieve them. So if I say yes, it has now removed it, but I can recover it from my local computer. So let's go back to our workshop. Go back to the tasks. Dealing with configurations is much more visual, easier and faster, and the clear working folder is a lot safer and a lot more visual. So just to recap, file caching improvements, file batching and compression to improve load performance, progress and summary, local file later, so the ability to get warnings in the load window so that we are aware of what's happening. We've got a brand new single save window with a progress and a summary. We can have the options of mask properties, neutral files. We've got all of our save options. We can include drawings in the save even if they haven't been loaded before. The ability to ignore items. We've got a background file uploader that dramatically improves the save performance, especially if you're working remotely and improved configurations and improved clear working folder.